Welcome to the Unity Now podcast, where we discuss unity in the face of division. Stemming from the Unity 2020 plan, we explore how to bring unity to America and end the dysfunctional and destructive Republican-Democrat duopoly. Unity Now is 100% volunteer run and supports the Unity movement at articlesofunity.org.
Welcome back to the Unity Now podcast. I'm your host, Toby Davis, and today I'm joined by Curt Jaimungal and Desh Amila. Curt is a filmmaker, entrepreneur, and podcaster. He is founder of Indie Film TO at indiefilmto.com that takes filmmakers through a 3-month incubation period to help, and I quote, get your shit made and, more importantly, seen. He's also host of The Theories of Everything with Curt Jaimungal, a video series about theoretical physics, consciousness, and God. Desh is a filmmaker and entrepreneur with such projects as This Is 42, which is a team of young people who aim to advance humankind by bringing passionate people together, Think Incorporated, and the film Islam and the Future of Tolerance. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you two have joined forces to create a documentary, the film Better Left Unsaid, which is what we're here to discuss. And I just kind of pulled it from the website. It's a documentary that offers a nuanced take on political extremism and a necessary evaluation on the crossroads the West is now facing. Is there any more you guys want to add to your background or to the purpose of the film itself? And Desh, we'll start with you.
So, look, I don't think we need to emphasize how important this conversation is, what we're trying to do with this film. Anyone who is remotely interested in politics in the West knows that we are at a crossroads. If you're in America, you are feeling it more than ever. And it is important, we have these conversations, and Better Left Unsaid attempts to take a deep dive into areas that we felt as not in mainstream conversation. Now, that's not to say this is a mainstream movie. We know we are entirely independently produced and distributed, just to keep the intellectual integrity of the project. Mm-hmm. And we know this will reach a certain audience, and we hope we reach all of that audience. And this is why we are on this podcast talking to your audience. People who've seen it have so far been kind enough to give us encouragement and say that we have done a good job. Obviously, that's up to people who watch it, but we do hope throughout the conversation here on this podcast, we can encourage everyone to go eventually watch it, because I'll add a personal anecdote here. See, I was born in Sri Lanka to a country of civil war, which we had a civil war for 28 years. People in the West, I cringe when they use terms like civil war and, all this extremism and cancel culture. And, you don't really understand what you're really saying because there's a point. My country was the most dangerous place for journalists. It was worse than what the cartels were doing in certain parts of the world. And free speech is not something that is, or freedom for that matter, was not something that was easily available for any average person. And the last 4 years has shown anything in America. Even the democratic giants as America has many cracks that can eventually lead down a path that is antithetical to Enlightenment values and what the West stands for. So now, I don't mean to sound alarmist. If I did, it is coming from a place because I've lived through something that I don't want to see anywhere else.
Right.
And part of this movie stems from that lived experience and somewhat importance and the urgency of talking about this.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Curt, do you want to add anything to that? As far as your
I agree.
background
I agree with what Desh said. My background is in academia and more of the analytical end. So Desh's motivations are more noble than mine, which are somewhat pretentious. I like ideas and I like to try to make sense of what doesn't make sense. And for me, someone who grew up in the West, even though I was born elsewhere, so I'm technically an immigrant, but I was predominantly raised in the West. I'm raised in the lap of luxury, and I don't have any of the experience that Desh has. So for me, it's more about disentangling the seeming contradictions on the extreme left, somewhat on the extreme right, focusing on the extreme left though, and then doing an etymology as to where their historical roots are from and how do they influence one another, and a prognosis, where is it going? So diagnosis and a prognosis.
Okay. So Desh, you mentioned there 28 years in civil war in Sri Lanka, and that we're at a crossroads now, and that we can use those terms civil war sometimes. We're way off base, right, from what you've actually seen in your experience there. So how close are we to that? And are we using those terms now in early 2021? If somebody's saying we're approaching civil war, are we any closer to that point?
The simple answer is I don't think so. I'm consider myself an optimist. So from everything I'm seeing, I don't think America is close to a civil war. But that doesn't mean America is not at the brink of more violence.
Mm-hmm.
That is an entirely different proposition versus civil war. We used to say people who disagreed with Trump quite easily compared him to Hitler. Trump's not Hitler, but at the same time, Joe Biden is not Stalin. Right? Those hardline thinking come from extreme way of looking at the world, and also otherizing a group of people. If you continue down this path, and each extreme end organizes to retaliate because they are fighting evil, then there is a clear path to more violence and then eventually a civil war. But I do think right now the rhetoric of the country heading towards civil war is just that, it's rhetoric. I don't think America is heading to civil war.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. I keep hearing that from experts on certain topics that can relate to this, that they don't think we are that close as maybe even I once thought. So that's continually good to hear. So Curt, give me a sense of, while you were making the film, I think if I'm correct, you finished it, or there was something about the George Floyd killings. I think you finished it before that. Is that right? Okay, so while you were making it, were there any other sort of surreal moments in the headlines that you were talking about in the documentary?
I didn't expect. I thought, so the movie was pretty much finished March of 2020. Pretty much. I mean, there's plenty of editing that Desh did to help make it saleable and comprehensible. But I was expecting this whole radical left, quote unquote, extreme right, quote unquote, alt-right, to go down. Desh was saying, it's persisting. I'm like, man, we got to release it now. March 20. We're on the downward trend. He said, nah, it'll be there. And then it increased like mad. Now, right now, because Biden got elected and because Trump is silenced and many of the alt-right apps and websites are also deplatformed.
Right.
It's not clear. Like it's muddy. It's almost like if you've played a strategy game, there's that fog of war. You don't know what lies beyond it. So I don't know how much fervor is there on the alt-right in the same way that one could know by looking it up in public places before. So I don't know. I don't know if this is going up or down. As for what else we left out, well, COVID, the politicalization of COVID was interesting to me because according to the Big Five model, this is something I asked quite a few people and I still don't have an adequate answer as to why it's the case. Conservatives should be the ones that are more, that have higher disgust sensitivity and higher in orderliness, which means they like separations, which means they should like the disinfecting. I know I do. I'm a germaphobe, so this is almost like my ideal situation.
Yeah.
Personally.
My wife's the same way. She enjoys the spacing like in grocery stores. She says that should stay in place.
Yeah, and I love that every meeting is just I just sit at my desk. I don't have to go anywhere.
Right.
So much time is saved as well. Okay. So there's that. But I would imagine that conservatives would be the ones that are pro, let's say the restrictions, let's say.
Yeah.
But then at the same, and then the liberals would be the ones that are saying, no, we need more openness. We should open up more.
It's almost embedded in the word liberal.
Right.
Yeah.
So then I can't make sense of it from a Big Five model, but I can make sense of it from the perspective of, sorry, I have to change these headphones. Okay, we're back. Yeah, so from a Big Five point of view, I would imagine it to be the opposite case as to what it is. Mm-hmm. But then another way of analyzing it is that, well, the left hates Trump so much that they can use this to say, look how poor Trump is doing, the more that we say COVID is dangerous. And the conservatives then rail against that because then they're like, well, you're hating on Trump. No, we like Trump. And so therefore COVID must be not such a big deal. Because in the beginning, the early stages, it was the conservatives that were on COVID. They were the ones that were saying, hey, November, December, like, look, this is something big coming from China. You should be careful. You should put on masks. And then it switched. So there were quite a few spikes in this whole extreme left-right political divide that weren't included in the film, but thematically, they're all the same. They're driven by the same architecture, structure. And that's what we tackle. So hopefully we've tackled the abstraction rather than the specifics, and the abstractions apply.
That makes sense. So for either of you, the film seems to display and explain where we are, what contributed us to getting here, what it all means in a very broken down fashion. And as one of the part of the film even asks, why am I learning this from an indie documentary? To your knowledge, either of you, is there any other work like this that takes and breaks it down for the viewers?
There are attempts that, I think, look, any filmmaker would say something that is a little bit self-serving because, we are biased towards our own creation.
Sure.
I have seen other documentaries that skirt the issue, but I personally have not seen something that directly goes to the heart of some of the foundational things we are talking about.
Okay. And
if you follow Brett,
go ahead,
sorry.
Curt. No, fine.
Okay, if you follow Brett Weinstein and you hopefully you do because you're following this and this is spurred by his movement. So if you follow him and some of the themes that he touches on, there is no other film. Now we're saying that obviously self-servingly, like Desh pointed out, but truthfully, there is no other film that tackles the extreme left as a whole, as well as the philosophy that precipitates it, like ours, that does an analysis.
Yeah.
And partly that's because it's going to severely limit your audience. If you watch this, like you mentioned, you have to pause it and rewind it to understand what's being said because it's so highfalutin at times and academic. It doesn't seem on the surface to be a film that will have a wide appeal given how intellectually challenging some parts of it can be.
And I would agree. And I wanted to hear it from you guys because I think all of us that watched it in the podcast team agreed as well. That's why many of us watched it so many times as well, because it's so in depth and so much to unpack. And Curt, you've mentioned a couple of times now using analytics or the analysis of it. So it's almost like you took, and this is part of kind of like my day job, so I'm interested in this part of it. It's almost like you had a big spreadsheet of data, you organized it, say 300,000 lines of data, you organized it and separated it in a way that we do a lot of times with that kind of data with like graphs and presentations. But now you've done that in a movie form, in a documentary form. Is that kind of how you went about it? Did you write down a big brainstorming list of ideas to start this?
You're extremely on the point with that word 300,000. In the notes that I have for the film, there's 300,000 words. So that's a huge, huge, huge novel, 300,000 words. Now, most of it is like repeating and nonsense as well, but plenty of it is bullet points, which means it should be longer than that. So there's so much of this film that got cut out. Basically, what I had to do was, at first I had, I'll do a little bit of a tangent. Whatever film I take part in, I'm always thinking, how can I tackle this uniquely and do something that's different? So one thing I was thinking was, okay, non-linearity in film, I love that. So I've never seen a non-linear documentary. Okay, how can you do that? Given that documentaries are not there to confuse you, like something like Memento or Christopher Nolan's films in general. You can't just have someone watch a documentary and be confused and then it makes sense at the end. That's not how documentaries work. Narratives, right. It's fine. But I'm wondering, okay, so how can I take that structure? So there's some non-linearity you have seen when you watch the film. Now, then there were other elements put in. There was an animated sequence that cost like $10,000 or more that I was going to put in before. And it would have made the film like 2.5 hours. And it was so cool. It was a unique aspect it was originative. But I didn't, and avant-garde, but I didn't put it in because it cost too much and the film was far too long. Anyway, it was essentially, okay, now that I have this idea of how do I make this and tackle it in a particular to me manner, okay, let's do the research. And then now I have to somehow find patterns and then convey these patterns simply. And then now that I think it's simple, how can I make it more simple? And then how can I make it more simple, but not sacrifice the precision? And I just kept going. And even that wasn't that great because Desh came in and rightly said, Curt, this needs to be cleaned up. And from a third person's perspective, I have a first person's perspective. So he came in and Desh came in and
right.
And tidied up my untidy home, my unkempt place.
Yeah. And those of us that dive into analytical sort of things by nature sometimes need a second set of eyes, a third party to come in and rearrange it, help clean it up. So
yeah, and there's plenty of writing that's done in the editing too. So
yeah.
He, in a sense, Desh helped write the film because if you help cut it, you help write it.
And we should pause there, and we'll say this as many times as we need to because people need to know this. Go to betterleftunsaidfilm.com because you guys are still working on getting donations to help release the film. Is that right?
Yeah, we are now at the final stages. Actually, this morning we're recording this in early February. We got some confirmation, so it looks like we are going to get a March release date towards end of March. And yes, this as mentioned earlier, fully independent. Any support that is going to come our way is going to go towards marketing it to a larger group of people. Yeah, thank you for mentioning this.
Of course, absolutely. I think hopefully I speak for all 10 to 20,000 members of the Unity 2020 movement when I say everyone in the country, everyone in the West, I should not speak for America, but the West needs to see this and to help understand where we are and how we got here to a degree. There's probably even more to unpack, and maybe a second part can include that animation you were talking about, Curt.
Yeah, we'll see.
Actually, there is a version that is exclusively available on betterleftunsaidfilm.com when it comes out, which is a 2-hour version of the director's cut, which is slightly different. There's a little bit more detail added. Curt and I went back for months and months, coming to the cut that you have seen. But yeah, if you want to watch it a second time, I recommend you watching once. If you like it the first time around, you want to know more, watch the director's cut, and you will get a few more bits and pieces that we didn't include in the public version.
At betterleftunsaidfilm.com, that's where the money goes directly to the filmmakers, as well as it's the only place that unlocks both for the same price, the public and directors. You don't have to pay anything extra for the public or the director. It's the same price that comes unlocked with them both. I mean, both of them are unlocked.
Good to know. And we'll include that in our show descriptions on YouTube and all the audio podcasts. All right. So back to the film a little bit, if we can. I had a note here about, Michael Shermer, who we've had on this show, he kind of hints in one of his pieces on the film that the extreme left may derive a little bit from an overreaction to the Holocaust, and that he touches on the social sciences shifted to not reference a biological basis for human behavior. If that's true, which I suspect, at least on some level, that it is, and the Holocaust was the end game when the extreme right kind of ran amok, then what does the end game look like if the extreme left runs a similar course? Do you guys have a sense of that going through this analysis for the film? And
Curt,
sorry, either one of you.
Yeah, okay. Curt, you've gone through the history. I mean, I'll just add one point, and Curt, you can elaborate, which is this experiment has run before. This is the extreme left has had power in many places, and history has already shown us what happens.
What I would say is that one cannot, the tricky part of this is that you don't step in the same river twice. So no matter what, the situation is slightly different, and one can always say, well, this is not the communism of the past, or the proclaimed communism of the past, or the proclaimed socialism of the past. And that we learned from our mistakes, given that we've learned from other mistakes in the past. So the extreme left can always say that same, but the other tricky part is same with the extreme right. Why can't the same argument be used to put forward that, hey, that wasn't fascism done right? Like, we know fascism better. It's not to say where will it lead. What I can do is point to historical examples of people who professed to be following similar doctrines, but they're not exactly the same. China's not the exact same as Stalin's Soviet Russia, and it's not the exact same as Bernie's America, vision of America, and Venezuela, and so on. So it's a tough question. It's like even answering the question of how will 3 particles evolve in physics is like, that's not easy. It's somewhat simple now, but we didn't know it 80 years ago. So it's just, and that's a three particle system, let alone a whole country.
Right. Okay. Understood. Yeah. I mean, we had Dr. Edward Watts on the show a few episodes back, who's a kind of an expert on the fall of the Roman Republic, which our founders based, a lot of the doctrines to found our country on the Roman Republic. And, that lasted for over almost 500 years. And, as a model, they thought at this point in their journey that it was going to last forever. But for them to extrapolate out how it ended would probably be next to impossible, kind of like what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if
Rome
you guys...
lasted for... Okay, never mind.
No, go ahead.
Continue. Rome lasted for much longer than 500 years, as far as I know. 1,000, I think. It's from 700 to 400. I'm not sure. But you're talking about the Republic of Rome.
The Republic, yeah. Right. Yeah, the empire, which, obviously came afterwards, lasted for much longer.
Yeah.
So if somebody were to watch this this film and they fall in the category of the extreme left, what would you hope they would, bring from the film to take away from it?
Ideally, just a moment of pause. Give them a moment to think. Because if you're from the extreme left, you're going to start very soon from a position of being defensive. and you may feel as some of the points mentioned is an attack on you, because one of the things that is prevalent on extreme ideologies is it's not just the idea. You're, as a person, your personhood is reflected on the idea. You've taken in the idea and it is part of you now. So it may feel as it's a personal attack. We can assure you it isn't. We're interested in challenging ideas, not necessarily the person behind it. So the ideal outcome is for them to take a moment, think about what they saw, and hopefully talk to somebody about what they saw and see, even if it is one of their peers, and see how the response is. And if the response is outright hostility towards the idea, or just simply not wanting to talk about it, you must, hopefully, after seeing the movie, must make you think, wait, why is it so hard for us to talk about this? If you could have that nugget of doubt and then go down that path, that is the ideal outcome. Now, it is the best case scenario in my mind. I don't know how many people from the furthest of the left will watch this. And historically, what I've seen is people will criticize the movie without seeing it. They will see the trailer and they will judge the entire movie and they will criticize it without really watching it. I hope that is not the case. I hope you watch it before you criticize it.
That's a good point. I mean, do you think people will take sound bites and
do what
mainstream media does?
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, look, I had this.
It's already happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, there's a similar. I mean, I hope we did it in a way it makes it difficult for someone to do it, but it is going to happen. My last movie, Islam and the Future of Tolerance, when we were making it, people were warning us, saying this is going to give the far right the ammo they need to be, bigots and blah, blah, blah. But we deliberately made it intellectually dense because we want to do right by the difficult subject matter. It was a bit hard for anyone to take a sound bite without looking like they're just doing that. It's hard to cut out a part. With this, Curt's gone to extreme lengths to make sure when he's explaining something, it is done in quite a thoughtful way. So it is hard to take sound bites out, but that doesn't mean it will prevent from somebody doing it. It will happen. But hopefully we can honestly stand around our 2 feet and say, look, we gave this a really good, honest attempt. That doesn't necessarily mean everything on the film is to be taken as gospel. It's completely not what we're trying to do.
And Curt, you mentioned, it's already been taken out of context.
Yeah, some people have said they're not going to watch it because this film promotes white supremacism. It, as Desh said, gives ammo, where they keep getting this phrase of ammo, gives ammo to the extreme right. That someone added me because, like you mentioned, I have a podcast about physics and consciousness and so on. And they added me on Facebook because they liked that podcast. And then as the Capitol riots were happening, January 6th, I was in the middle of 2 other podcasts. I had no idea the riots were even going on, but I would, in between filming, I checked my Facebook and someone's like, why are you not the same person? Why are you not criticizing what's happening on Capitol Hill? I'm like, I don't even know what's happening. They're like, the fact that you're saying nothing, silence is violent. They didn't say that, but silence is violence. And if you're not taking a stand, then that means you support the right just by your inaction. Now that's so... See, there's some truth to that inaction is action, in the sense that if you see a dying puppy on fire in front of you and you don't save it, that says something about your character. And same with if it's a child, same with if it's just any living creature capable of suffering.
Absolutely.
But so there is something that's what's always difficult about disentangling these arguments from the left. Something that I think about is that the devil is characterized as a liar, but I'd say that the more pestiferous aspects of evil is the fact that it's sometimes true. Because if it was false all the time, it actually gives you redemptive knowledge. You listen to it and you know, okay, that's not the case. Great. Thank you for telling me what's not the case. But because they say because they're positioned around a kernel of truth, then you have to use a significant amount of cognitive effort to disembroil what's true from what's not, as well as to discern what the hidden motivations are if you want to take the psychoanalytical route.
Yeah, I mean, so you touched on it there, cognitive effort, and I sometimes think about the problems associated with what we're talking about as pure laziness. To be an individual is hard. To think for yourself is hard, or people think it's hard. It probably shouldn't be, but to to dive into subjects like we're talking about and that's covered in your film, and to really think about what you might believe in and how you think about these things, and not just lean into your particular group, whether it's religion or political or sex or whatever it may be. It's hard to do that sometimes. And as our climate gets more extreme, it's increasingly harder because of the backlash you face. So in a lot of ways, it becomes, I think, lazy, and that's what's adding to the destruction of the individual and the adding to these groups.
Yeah, I have something to say about that. That it's difficult because to think for yourself means you make yourself naked and open to attack. And I know that for me, it's extremely difficult for me to think for myself, and that probably 99% of what I think is not my own thoughts. And the more that I analyze it, the more I realize I'm espousing what other people have told me, and I'm unconsciously attributing those thoughts to myself. I think it's when people say, like, are you left or right? People ask us that all the time.
Yeah.
And just ask me that in my personal life. I find it so, I don't like to answer. First of all, I call myself apolitical, but I wouldn't say that I'm left or right, because as soon as you categorize yourself, you create a demarcation between you and then what's not you. And then, okay, well, that's fine, because you have a body. The air is not your body. So you have some demarcations. Okay. But then you start to unconsciously adopt the points of view of what you're already labeled as.
Right.
And I see this characterizing two people I like, which is Steven Crowder and Philosophy Tube's Abigail. So on the opposite ends of the political spectrum, that I can almost guess what they're going to say before they say it, because that's the standard view in the conservative or the extreme liberal thinking. And as soon as you have that, then that means that it's not your thought, because it's not original to you. Let's say the default state of an intellectual should be disagreement. It should be, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. All I see are flaws. If you're truly thinking, even in your own, see, that's why you shouldn't have a party. You shouldn't affiliate yourself with a party, because then you're saying that the majority of my views are shared by this party, but the odds of that are so low, because you're an unexampled individual. So you should have unique points of views. But to do that means that you lay yourself bare, you're naked, and then you're open to attack. And so cowardice has stopped me and stops me on a regular basis from expressing what I think and becoming an individual. And there is, again, a grain of truth in the adoption of other people's points of views, because you can't think from scratch everything. So you have to adopt something. So that's why it's always tricky. Like, where do you draw that line?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, not exactly, but I know what you're saying. It's like we could easily say, the danger I pose on this with our podcast is I'm a white male from a conservative state. I'm in Indiana right now, born with blonde hair, blue eyes. So now I'm privileged. I am the oppressor. I have the power, all those things. And, why should the two of you even have a conversation with me? Because I'm obviously in a completely different set of groups than the two of you are, right?
Yeah, to the extreme left. I wouldn't say it's obvious at all, but to the extreme left, it's obvious.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, lots of thoughts going through my head, but I'll let you continue the conversation.
No, you go ahead.
It's this whole idea of it's just the judgment of you for your skin color, and from people who generally well-meaning people who want to mainly root for the small guy and championing liberty. The dichotomies, they don't see what they're doing. As Brett said, when you attempt to go after one group of people, they will get defensive. It will emerge. And then it further validates the first attack. So it's for me, I think it's probably how I was brought up and my upbringing. Some people now label this as somehow a right-wing talking point that you don't see color. I remember just recently, young Coleman Hughes was on Bill Maher, and he made that comment, and his interlocutor basically said, "Oh, come on, you can't be serious." It's so pervasive that one must see color. For me, what I continue to see is I get quite queasy whenever I see anything that is trying to fracture any part of society, whether it is political affiliation, political parties, religion, nationality, etc. Now, there are some things, Curt and I disagree. Actually, there's a fair few things we disagree, but that's okay. I don't even like to use the word. I don't hate Curt for having some of those ideas, or not having some of my ideas. I see him as a fellow creator and a friend. We can have differing ideas, but we can still have certain grounding ideas, a foundation we agree on, and then we can build on it. We can fundamentally disagree on things, and that's fine. I'm going on this tangent because you mentioned that and Curt, you can attest to this. Almost every podcast we've been on, every show we've been on, this has come up. The host generally identifies with their skin color and makes a comment about it. And for people who are listening to this on audio, I'm sure you can catch my accent. You can't do that with Curt very much, but we're two brown guys, but that shouldn't really matter.
Right.
It really shouldn't matter. But it is somehow, it matters a great deal for a lot of people because it's a demarcation of what I am ought to be. It's just frustrating that somehow, we are talking about this, about skin color.
Yeah, I had that experience recently, a week ago, with Black History Month. My 6-year-old, which I should hold that his age and his grade till the end of the little story, but my 6-year-old in kindergarten had to do a little project on Rosa Parks, and I had to help him with it because his video wouldn't work on his computer. They do e-learning twice a week. So it was a little 8-minute video. It was very well done. It was animated. It was lighthearted, but it was on Rosa Parks and the history and what she went through. It didn't necessarily hide the fact that, what she went through as a black person growing up and what she had to do on the bus, to make a difference. And I felt something was off about that. I couldn't quite pin it down, and I talked to my wife about it, and I don't know if I still can't pin it down, but it's to that point, I think, is that should the kindergartner, should he even know about that yet? Is it time to talk to them about the fact that it even happened? I'm not saying he shouldn't learn about it at some point, but is it too early? Should we be making that demarcation already to him? And I don't know if I'm asking either of you that question. I'm just kind of posing that out loud as something that I'm struggling with personally.
In the same.
Well,
yeah.
let me just add to that. I was out with my 7-year-old the other day. We went for a long walk, and behind us was a group of Indian university students. There's probably about 8 or 9 of them. We eventually we weren't part of the group, but for an average observer, we are all part of the same group as far as they're concerned. Right. Anyway, we stopped at an open area. There was an ice cream van, and we were getting ice creams, and a kind of old beat up car was parked, and 3 guys got out. One of them had a mullet, and he pointed at all of us, mainly the Indian students, and he started doing this making monkey noises and pointing and all this thing. And I had to explain to my kid what was happening, because she was asking, why is he doing that? Why is he making fun of everyone? That is a direct, it's a rare occurrence, but it is, if I were to find a racist act, now there's a clear example.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, in explaining that, I then had to go into explain what is racism. She's mentioned that a few times now, and she's now quite sensitive. When you're quite young, you are, I think there's a level of empathy that is naturally there, so they do want to care. So I do think it is a conversation to be had, but what you need to understand is I think there's a clear difference between indoctrinating a child with a certain set of ideas versus giving them information. Like, I teach her finance. She's 7, but I teach her finance because I learned about money very late in my life, and I am baffled how this is not part of, traditional education. So I'm teaching her that. Agreed. But again, I'm just providing, information. And I teach her about religion from a pragmatic point of view. Not, I'm not trying to indoctrinate in any sort of religion. I think there is something to it. I think what may have made you uneasy is, obviously right now you are part of this larger movement trying to grapple with what is happening to Western democracies. And so you are acutely aware of the critical race theories and the insanity that's out there. So even the smallest bit of information may, quote unquote, trigger you to be overly suspicious of what's happening. I think that's plausible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate that feedback there. Yeah. I mean, I might owe you for that therapy session a little bit.
Well, something that people who dislike the extreme left, as well as people who dislike the extreme right, whatever, what they do is they dislike by association. So I'll give you an example. It's not the teaching of a 6-year-old Rosa Parks that annoys someone. It's the collateral damage that's done along with that, because it's going to come from a particular point of view, and that it doesn't just stop with a fact. It comes with a chronicle along with it, an interpretation, an inference about how society works, and that's attached to some quote unquote radical leftist dogma and ideology and so on, whatever it may be. So you dislike that. You don't care too much about the fact, because maybe you're willing to have your kid play violent video games and like Mortal Kombat when you're 5 years old, which I did, and I hopefully turned out somewhat okay. So it's not the thing in and of itself, it's what comes with it. And I remember I was with someone who, let's say, identifies with the radical social justice. She studies social justice. She wouldn't like the term SJW. But anyway, I was pointing out, that dog, see that dog breed? That dog breed is a pretty bright, or it's an intellectual, it's a smart breed, that one. And then she's like, no, it's not. And then I was wondering, she kept arguing with me about that. And I was wondering why. And then I realized, because if you can make an association between breeds being different in IQ, then what's to stop you from talking about races in humans as being different in IQ? And because that's abhorrent, then the dog breed is abhorrent, because I know where that may lead to. So it's not that she doesn't care that corgi is less intelligent than a Doberman Pinscher. I don't know if that's true, but she doesn't care too much about that. Yeah. She cares about where might it lead, the association. And I imagine that's what's going on, because I do have I see it in myself. I see it in myself, and I have seen it in myself, especially when I was researching for this documentary. When I would look at the pro-communism arguments or pro-socialism arguments, or even pro-right, alt-right arguments, there was a part of me that my eyes actually defocused and I started to skim, and I didn't like what I was reading. So I would quickly search what I thought the gist of them was. And then I would say that debunked, so that I could see what is it debunked. I don't have to go through and read it myself. Yeah. Then I started to realize, okay, Curt, what is the proper job of someone who is trying to live truthfully and honestly? Well, how about you develop your own points of view as an individual? So that means instead of the questions which I would ask myself, which is like, why is the alt-right wrong? Or why is communism wrong? I would say, what is wrong about communism and what is right about communism? And do that for everything. What is wrong and what is right? And then I could also intellectually justify that to myself, because there's a huge part of me that wants to shut other people down and prove them to be incorrect. Almost like an intellectual gymnastics. But I thought, well, if I have a more articulated point of view, a more distinct one, then that can only be advantageous. So if someone said, like, here's some of the pros of communism. No one or very few on the middle left and middle right who dislike the extreme left would ever admit that there's positive aspects to communism. Well, here's one. It's great for artists, because artists have a minimum income and then they don't have to worry about doing an alternative job. So art actually flourished in at least East Germany. Now you might think, well, how can art flourish because it's propagandistic? Well, it turns out it did, because artists don't like to have to work a non-artist job. So I'm like, okay, so that's interesting. That's great. So then you want to know, well, what can I take? What's the wheat from the chaff? Instead of constantly denigrating. And I'm guilty of that. And I try to, I'm guilty of that. So I'm also speaking to myself as I'm speaking out loud, I'm speaking to myself.
Yeah, it's almost to not admit there's anything right with it is to put it in its nice little box over here where I can know that it's pure evil. And I can also then draw that line to myself saying that I would never be a part of that because I know that's evil. I can see that. I can know what's evil about it, where that's not true. And the line of good and evil runs right through every one of us. And we're all capable of that. And Jordan Peterson kind of led me to that thought process. And I spent a lot of time studying Nazi Germany from that aspect.
Yeah. I would also say that as much as people say, Desh might be one of these people, and please, Desh, please don't take offense to this. As much as people would say, yeah, you shouldn't get offended when your ideas are challenged. That you should be replacing. Your ideas are fungible. They're interchangeable. Well, I would say that it's difficult to disentangle your idea from you. And it's just not trivial because you use your ideas, or at least your beliefs, to navigate through the world. And it's something like the way I think about it is like, if you watch, what's that post-apocalyptic movie about cars and gasoline and Mad Max, right. So if you watch Mad Max, it's like armored vehicles. That's what your beliefs are like. They actually help you navigate through the world. So you have you're taking armor and you're taking different bulletproof metal from different places and amalgamating it to formulate something that you can actually use to avoid pitfalls and maybe even get to some positive place.
Right.
And when people say, okay, well, they believe that that other person's evil, that they're no, but also part of it is that they've been hurt in the past and they need armor for themselves. Now the reason why I say that you should have your own point of view, that you should know what's right, what's wrong about what you think, and also to have your own reasons for why it's right. If your reasons, like I mentioned about Steven Crowder and Philosophy Tube, if your reasons are one that I can say for you, then that means they're not your own because I've read them from somewhere else. Which means in this strange analogy, you should realize how your car works and you shouldn't just take pieces from other people because they can be mismatched, even though in the short term it works. Okay, that's that.
That's a good point. All right, guys. So we touched on the Unity 2020 movement before we started. I kind of gave you guys a synopsis of that in the podcast. So understanding our general idea behind that movement, do you think a movement like that is a way to start, working against the extremes left and right and bring ourselves out of this, away from this crossroads? Or are there movements like it that could work or will work together?
Well, it is interesting we are talking about this because earlier today we spoke about this exact same thing, and I've spoken about this in other podcasts as well. As noble as the attempt is, I think because of I'm going to use some words from, it is very popular from the far left, the structural, the nature of American politics, how it is laid out, what system, voters and political parties need to use, creating a new party is not going to change that. What needs is, again, a fundamental rethink of how voting itself works. So you have plurality wins, right? A system where let's say there's 4 people at an election, you vote for person A. Person A gets 40% of the votes. The other 3 gets 60%. So in other words, majority voted against the 40% winner, but the 40% winner nonetheless is the winner.
Right.
See, in countries like Australia, where we have a ranking system, you don't get to win if you only get 40%. You are forced to work with the other groups so you can get 50% plus. And this is why the rest of the world was bemused by the fact that Hillary with 3 million votes, popularity wise, but didn't win. Obviously you have a slightly complicated electoral system. It's fine. But ultimately the point of creating a third party is doomed to fail because the major parties have no incentives to work with you. Unity 2020 is not the first attempt. There are a number of attempts. I know personally another attempt called Save America Movement, SAM. There are a number of attempts as such. And that's why you hear the terms like, GOP is a large tent, the Democratic Party is a large tent. It's just simply saying that, there are polar opposites within the same group, but they can't go out and create a separate party and have an effective political campaign because the American system is designed for that not to work. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be changed. I mean, the American Constitution doesn't say that is the way voting should work. It gives the mandate to states. So
Right.
I believe Maine and maybe some other place in America already has ranked voting.
Nebraska.
And
Yeah.
I've mentioned this again earlier at another podcast where, Australia, right now, a conservative-led coalition government, basically for over a year, almost a year, paid most working Australians a wage. Like this is social welfare, that you can't even comprehend in a sort of American, like GOP wouldn't even. You guys are arguing about giving $1,400 a one-off payment, where in Australia for at least 6 months, businesses got paid to pay an average worker minimum $3,000 a month. and now it's down to $1,500, and it's going to end soon. But the point is, they did it for over a year.
Yeah.
And a conservative government before that, as stimulus, gave people money. Like, that's only workable when there's a coalition governing, because they have to work with from a moderate perspective. They can't appeal to an extreme voting bloc to get them elected. I think that's probably America's way out. I don't, as much as I like the idea of third, fourth, fifth parties, it's not going to have a meaningful impact.
Yeah, and the movement itself wasn't meant to be a third party, but even given that, I can see where it could become that, just naturally. Part of the movement itself was ranked choice voting, and how we drafted our candidates that would have been on the ticket was ranked choice voting, and that's something everyone was for, at least the majority of the people were for. So, but yeah, thank you for that. See, me in Indiana, even as red-pilled as that you might think I am on this podcast and the Unity movement, had no idea about what you just described with Australia.
So I know we're getting...
Here's another
Here's
another anecdote you may be able to use in the future. The strictest gun laws in Australia were passed by a conservative government. So that should tell you all about how things work. I mean, again, another conservative government just announced zero emission target by 2035. Again, you would think in America, if I told you here are the policies enacted, what kind of government it is, they would say, oh, it has to be Democrats if it's in America, but it isn't.
Good point. Okay. So I know we're coming up right at the end of your guys' time here. So just a couple follow-up questions for each of you. Curt, your YouTube channel, Theories of Everything, I believe it says you're supporting a new film that you're kind of investigating throughout this. It's a podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, the plan is, and it's in the extremely rudimentary phase right now, to take different clips from the podcast and formulate a documentary, but that's far in the future. I'm not thinking much about that right now.
Okay.
And Toby, if you like, I can stay on for another 10 minutes after Desh leaves.
Okay.
If you don't care, then I can go as well.
No, that's great.
I don't seem too enthusiastic. That's fine. I'm not offended.
No. It'd be great.
Yeah,
this has been a joy. You guys are extremely intelligent individuals who work very hard. When I had a very busy day today, but when I looked at that calendar and then I started looking at your bios and everything you guys are involved in, I felt guilty, just thinking that I was busy today. So
it's great to talk to you guys.
I goof off all the time. Like I think I'm a lazy anyway. So thank you for that. I don't think of that as myself at all. Maybe Desh for sure. But yeah.
Okay. I'm stereotyping here, but I have the immigrant mindset because I came here I have the typical immigrant story. So I get rather uncomfortable when I have too much free time. I really can't do it. I have multiple businesses. I run multiple operations. I run now, and I produce a podcast. Make the film. I'm about to start another podcast. For me, I need to be within reason, quite busy. I still do have downtimes, but you are extremely kind. I don't consider anything I do as even remotely unusual. It's just life.
Yeah, and the people that I meet at least, that are like the two of you, always say things like that as well. So you have that in common. And Desh, you mentioned a couple of podcasts. Do you want to mention those by name?
Well, main thing is love people to go watch betterleftunsaidfilm.com and watch the film, support us. If you want to hear a different perspective, I have a feeling some of your audience is already part of this podcast, but I produce Conversations with Coleman, a podcast. We have another podcast coming up. I am not at liberty to announce it, but quite an exciting podcast we will be releasing relatively soon. And I have a business called This Is 42. We are developing a new platform, which is coming out hopefully around April, May this year.
Fantastic. Yeah. The film Better Left Unsaid, and again, betterleftunsaidfilm.com. Send people there to sign up, donate, get a copy of the director's cut, and help you guys out. And so, Desh, do you need to go now?
Yeah, I should wrap up because I've got a call in a few minutes. But thank you again, mate. Really appreciate you taking the time. I look forward to hearing the podcast. All right, I'm out.
Absolutely.
Have a good one, Desh.
Have a great one.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
And so, Curt, yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't take you up on the bonus.
Maybe
Sure.
We'll start our paywall eventually now. And this will be the bonus 10 minutes or so.
Sure.
So go ahead.
Yeah. Do you have any questions that were directed toward me about the writing, about the directing, anything that, let's say, Desh wouldn't be able to answer?
Well, you talked about the analytical nature of bringing together all the things that you congealed. Can you go a little more into that and that process? How did you decide what to put in it? You had modernism, postmodernism, and how that has flowed. You went from in a timeline from the early 2010s to where we are now. Then you went through examples of communism and socialism from Cuba to Russia to Korea. How did you decide what to put in and what did you leave out, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Oh man, what I left out was plenty. Like I can scroll through a huge document that Google Docs won't even allow me to edit because as soon as apparently Google Docs has a word limit and I didn't know, or a character limit. So I have to reduce that document. Anyway, how did I arrive at the structure? Like I mentioned, part of it was thinking almost like an architect as to how can I make this, how can I have this, how can this have the Curt stamp in some way? And then another part was, well, how do I see this? What questions do I have? So it's pretty much, if you're talking to someone like, let's say Brett, and you knew nothing about this whole conundrum of radical left versus alt-right versus the moderates. Okay, you would say, okay, so what's going on? And then he would say, blah, 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 in his manner. And then you'd say, oh, okay, but what about that? And then you'd be like, okay, so it's the movie's essentially that. At some point I said, well, okay, some people say they're motivated by Marxism. Are they? What is Marxism? What is communism? What's the difference between those two? I don't get into that in the film, but what is the difference between those two? And how is that? Okay, now let's say that that's the case. Well, can't they say that the far right has done worse and is doing worse? Well, okay, let's investigate that. Okay, now that is there any connection or is it just tenuous between what's happened before and what's going on now? So it's pretty much me antagonizing myself with questions and then trying to answer them, and then it usually develops into further questions and then trying to answer that and constantly repeating until the very end, which was left on a question. It doesn't actually settle on a thesis. Some people have asked me, what's the thesis of this film? As if I'm an advocate. I'm not advocating for anything. I would say if I'm advocating for something, it would be for people to not lie. And that's only indicated and so it's like, what the heck does that have to do with anything? Not lying. Well,
it has to do with everything.
Well, the mendacity, let's say, inside gets replicated over and over and over. And it's difficult to explain without talking about other topics. And if you want, you can watch the director's cut, whoever's listening, or even Toby, I'll send it to you. No pressure to watch it, but I go into it a bit more there. It's not an easy, it's just not an easy subject. Like, see, the reason why if you see me constantly interrupting myself in my own speech, it's because I'm trying to live by some of my own principles, and I'm not trying to say that nobly as if I'm a paragon to be emulated, but I'm trying to be as precise in my speech as possible, but also at the same time try and say what I think currently. And it's so difficult, Toby. It's extreme. Like, I so badly want to say what I've already thought of or what I've heard someone else say. And so I'm just thinking, okay, how do I feel about this? And how do I say it precisely? And then I have different battles with myself because there are different versions that I can say. And I also don't want to repeat myself on any podcast. I don't want to have a set of already declared remarks that I'm referencing.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fun for, like, the egotist in me is like, well, what if people want to watch me multiple times? Which, like, no, 2 people do, and one of them is my mom, and the other is me. But if people rewatch me, I don't want them to think that, okay, Kurt's just repeating the same talking points. But at the same time, I also get a deeper understanding from speculating and reflecting from other points of view. To give a quick tangent, if you've heard of some people that say, if you're intelligent, if you can explain a complex idea simply. Okay, I don't believe that. I don't actually believe that, because even Einstein didn't enter his own there was a contest about not even general relativity, special relativity. How can you explain it in 500 words or 5,000? It might be one of those two. And he's like, I'm not going to enter my own contest because I can't do that. So other people did. So even Einstein couldn't explain his ideas simply. But there is something to be said about explaining your idea from another perspective, because the journey from where you know it, let's imagine it's like a space, it's like a geolocation, it's a location on a map. You traveling to another place to try and look at your previous perspective, to try and look at your previous location gives you a different perspective. So there is something to be said about that. And each time I'm trying to further my own understanding by saying it in a different manner or attacking it from another point of view. So if you see me stumble or be like staccato in my speech, it's because I'm fighting internally.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it's apparent in the film itself, but I think I said to you before, it seems that your mind is working at a speed that, I don't know if you know this, but most people's minds don't work that fast. And you're not speaking too fast, but you're speaking at a pace. It seems as though you're thinking at that pace, even as well. That's a question. How much of that was scripted that you were going through in the film as you were speaking versus you were just, I guess, riffing or freelancing on it? Yeah, I mean, just speaking to you now, you kind of remind me of watching Jordan Peterson the first few times that I did, and the way he would stop and look down and pause and come back to what he said and try to be careful in his speech. Do you try to follow the 12 rules for life, or
no?
Because you actually mentioned one there.
Yeah. Speaking precisely, I agree. I agree so wholeheartedly. The other, I can't even list the other 12. Pet a cat, right? Some of them are tongue in cheek, but but
tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
Right. The generator of all the other rules should be, or is, as far as I can tell, about truth. And then here's one that I didn't get to in the film that I kick myself because I didn't get to it, and I wonder how much of it is my own inner acrimony and antipathy. Is love. That is, that I don't talk about how much love has to play in Well, first of all, in truth, like this gets into a bit of a disagreement between me and Desh, because Desh is more of a rationalist, like a Sam Harris type, and I'm more of, well, I'm not a rationalist, and the reason is that rationality needs to appeal to something, and I'll explain what I mean. First of all, to change someone's opinion, if you're like, well, what we need is more dialogue. Yeah, first of all, you need someone to value dialogue. That's what you need first. And second, you want your dialogue to be propitious. You want it to be nourishing, to be positive. And that's not easy. It's not easy to do with yourself, even if you listen to your own self-talk. It's definitely not easy to do with someone else. If you analyze, like what I do with my own podcast, I rewatch myself and I'm like, oh, where was I too arrogant? Where was I showing off? Where was I stating it incorrectly so I can redress that? Where was I made, like, I also care about my appearance, so where was I made fun of if I was? I'm constantly assessing. But the point of that is to say that I notice that I'm not aimed at the good, let's say, aimed at something positive, aimed at moving toward the inner solid light. And I'll explain those. I can explain those metaphors later. But that's necessary before conversation. Otherwise, you can manipulate in your conversations just to get what you want. You can be harmful. You can tease. Well, teasing is fine. It's playful, but you can hurt with your words. And so there's something that comes before dialogue and rationality. And I think that this part of this whole radical left, extreme left, and even the extreme right, but mainly the extreme left, comes from an overvaluing of propositional knowledge that is rational knowledge, and not much of a valuing of what's participatory or procedural or perspectival. And those are words that come from John Vervaeke. If people think I'm being sesquipedalian for no reason, those come from coincidentally Jordan Peterson's colleague, who analyzes the meaning crisis from another perspective. He says it's because I'm paraphrasing, but he says it's because we're so overly rational. We think that all we need are our rationally constructed beliefs. And we're not built like that. Like, you don't change someone's mind by arguing with them, or even often reasoning with them. You change them by becoming their friend, by extending an olive branch, by love, by example. And those aren't rational per se. I don't even know what your question was, or if I answered it.
No, that's it doesn't matter. You're right. It's like salespeople. Really good salespeople can dip into a place with a potential customer, whoever they may be, and whatever service they may be selling, to the point where there's a relationship there. There's a belief that that person is going to help you out. There's an understanding of why they do what they do, and you believe in that why. And it's a feeling deep inside that instead it's not as simple as language, where you can describe, here's what I'm going to do for you, and here's why I'm better than anyone else when I'm selling. It's that piece of interaction that a truly good salesperson can tap into, I think.
Yeah, like mirroring, rapport, and other aspects. I wonder, like, okay, see, I used to have a sales background in the sense with Indie Film TO, like you mentioned in the beginning.
Yeah,
it's a film incubator, and if you watch my old videos, I find it so first of all heart-wrenching, but also extremely embarrassing, mortifying, because I'm putting on a frontage, a facade. I'm masquerading to be someone like Tony Robbins, and it's because I studied Tony Robbins intensely for like a year or so, and then I was like, well, I love Tony Robbins. I want to be Tony Robbins. Let me make a company that's like Tony. And I thought that was the right way. That's the right way. No, you just be like Tony. And this is something Jordan Peterson says is to follow. Well, it's not just Peterson. It's something that hopefully hopefully it's obvious. It's that you follow the truth. And even the scientists, the rationalists would say follow the truth. But truth is not easy to define. Truth is absolute. No matter what people are like, no. That Sam Harris was absolutely right in that conversation with Peterson. No, it's not that easy, because there's a correspondence theory of truth. There's pragmatic. That's Peterson's pragmatic theory of truth. There are, I forgot. There are 3 others. They're major contenders, but there are vastly more.
Yeah.
So there you follow some intuition of what's truth, but then you also have to. Then there's like a variety of truths that you can say. That is, right now I could say that is interesting that your curtain went from light to dark, which means that you're in a time zone that just changed from light to dark. Okay, so that's truth. Okay, but what would be the point? Like, why would I talk about your black and white painting in the back? Why would I talk about it's cool that you have a great mic setup? I mean, that one's positive. So hopefully that one would be embedded in something like love, because there are a variety of truths that can be said. Then it's the question of, well, which one? You're a finite being. You can only say one at a time. So you have to select them. You have to have a selection mechanism. And I think the Christian ethic, and it's not just in Christianity, but the Christian ethic made it clear that what you do is you run your life with truth as your aim. That's your center. That's your light. It's truth. And it's somehow selected by love, or you use truth in conjunction with love. And the love aspect I didn't get to in the film. That's something that I regret, because I think that is it's probably the most important element. It seems like our society is already overvaluing truth in a propositional sense. And when I say propositional, I mean, people can look up John Vervaeke's views on this. And yeah, so I regret that.
Yeah, you were talking about things you left out of the film.
Yeah, and I got to go in like 2 minutes now.
Well, so do I. So that's a great place to wrap up. We could do this for hours as far as I'm concerned, but I know you're a busy guy. And do you have any more podcasts tonight to get to?
Sorry. Oh, tonight? No.
Yeah,
I got to get some rest, man. Like,
Yeah,
I haven't been sleeping well. I've been kept up all night by like extreme insomnia for the past few weeks, and then it just affects my cognition for the next day, and I have so much to do, and it's just piling, and each day it just piles more and more, and so hopefully I can get some rest. I need to take medication for it, but I'm wary of sleep medications because they're extremely addictive. In fact, Peterson, as he went through an addiction with benzos, which you can use to sleep, but it's not the only medication. So I don't know. Cannabis doesn't even help. It used to, but I need something. So I mainly am going to catch up on sleep.
Well, I hope you can. You should rest easy, because the work you're doing in works like Better Left Unsaid are the truthful works that all the Western society needs to see, and I hope they do. And they can go to betterleftunsaid.com again. Anything else you want to mention?
I'd say yours is the works, man. Thank you. But you're actually doing something with your actions with the political party, and as much as Desh minimized the effect of having another political party and suggested that what we need is a reformulation of the entire system. As much as Desh said that, I do think that any shaking up of our current two-party system is likely to be positive. And it's not just any, sorry, I don't mean to put you in the pile of any, quote unquote. Yeah. You're more than just that. Like you hugely more than just that. Not many people would take what Brett said and put it into words and volunteer that. So I would say mine isn't the works. Yours is the works. Maybe mine is maybe mine is some words, but some people need to put actions to those. And I thank you. And I wish you luck, man.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Curt. And thanks for coming on. And I hope we can maybe bring you on at some other time and we can talk about your future work. Best of luck getting some sleep tonight.
Thank you. Yeah.
Have a great weekend.
All right. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care.
To find more conversations and content like this, be sure to subscribe to Unity Now on all major podcasting platforms. If you prefer video format, you'll find our channel with full episodes and clips on YouTube. Bye.